I'm Tracy Osborne, and you're listening to the Daring Woman podcast. Imagine the story of a generation being altered by women who were empowered to live their truth and in turn can empower others to live theirs. It's time to rewrite the narrative. When I was around, I think I was about 9, my mom took me shopping one day, and I remember sitting in the parking lot of the mall in California, and my mom was just going on and on and on about, I don't even remember what she said, but I remember sitting there staring out the window thinking, oh my God, my mom is gay. And, you know, this was back in the 70s or early 80s. I didn't really understand what being gay meant. I mean, I knew what it meant, but, you know, there was still a whole lot of stigma and everything around it. And she didn't really handle it very well. You know, she would say things like, you know, this music we're listening to is gay music, but listening to it isn't going to make you gay. And, you know, things like that. And what she meant was, you know, it was a band of lesbians, but, you know, things like that. And so I grew up not having a problem with homosexuality or anything like that, but I did have a serious problem with my mom being gay because I didn't understand it. And I always thought that if she hugged me or anything like that, it was sexual. Even though it wasn't, that was just kind of how it was in my head. And so, you know, it's one of those things, it's not really something you talk about with people. You know, sex, sexuality, that's not something we just bring out into the open. And my guest today, Dr. Martha Lee, is a sexologist, and that is what she does. She talks about sex and sexuality all day long. So, Martha, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
So, you know, let's talk a little bit about your backstory, because I know your mom was very influential in dealing with your sexuality and ultimately your profession, correct?
Yes, definitely. So, I didn't have much sex education growing up, and I was just fortunate that my mom was just slightly more educated than other moms of her generation, and she never gave me the idea that sex was dirty. Although she never said it was positive, she did hint that sex was something that I can look forward to when I grew up. So in that way, I didn't have much sex education either, but I was always looking forward to grow up, to enjoy sex. So in that sense, I was a little bit less inhibited than some of my counterparts, than some of my friends. And so when I grew up and saw that a lot of my friends had sexual problems and I didn't, I really wanted to find ways to help them. And so this became somewhat of a calling. It's not something that I wanted to do. It's not something that I grew up thinking that I would do, but I ended up doing it because nobody else was holding space and doing this in my country, and I wanted to stand up for positive sexuality.
Now, just listen. Excuse me, listeners, for those of you who are listening, she is actually calling in today from Singapore. She is Singaporean Chinese. So, you know, that culture, I don't know much about that culture, but it sounds like that culture is rather inhibited when it comes to sex and talking about it and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's right. So Singapore is actually not part of Malaysia or China. We are a republic, and we are just at the tip of the peninsula of Malaysia. And in Asia, we are one of the most economically prosperous countries, and we are a small country.
Right.
But just because we are economically prosperous, it doesn't mean that we are also sexually educated. So there's a lot of inhibitions. And when I was training to be a sexologist, I got my training in the US. And there were a lot of layers of inhibitions that started to peel off as I was going through the training. And by the end of it, I just felt so free because I started to understand all those questions around sex that I didn't get growing up, and certain topics that didn't occur to me as a heterosexual. The issues that gay, lesbian, transgender, bisexuals have to deal with, people who are elderly have to deal with, or people who are disabled, or people who are sick have to deal with regards to their sexuality, were things that I didn't think about. And so I got a lot of out of my training. And the biggest that I got out of my training was really the whole desensitization process, where at the end of the training, what I could do was be able to talk about sex without blinking an eye, to be very, very comfortable with my own sexuality, first of all, and then to be able to be comfortable talking about any topic relating to sex and sexuality so that I can support my future clients. So really, I think it is possible for every one of us to be able to become comfortable once we make the decision to do that for ourselves. And I see this as the last frontier of becoming an adult, because we get training in every other area of our lives when it comes to our career or driving a car or balancing our finances. We get training in all these areas, but when it comes to our sexuality, because of our culture, because of religion, because of our upbringing, we have all these inhibitions. And I think it's up to us as adults to not blame our government or society or religion or culture, but take ownership that, okay, this is an area that I don't really know, and I'm gonna find out and learn more for myself.
Sure. And and as kids, when we're growing up, it's one of those, we're very curious about it because it is kind of a taboo subject, which makes a child or a teenager want to know even more. And I'm not sure what it's like over in Singapore, but here in school, my kids got it. I think it was 8th grade. It might have actually been earlier this year, 9th grade. They got, sex education class in high school. Well, the way they do these classes, they're not open and, honest. And it's a lot of giggling and a lot of silliness, and it's not that one-on-one, because, kids in class are not going to want to ask questions about sex. They're not going to want to know, well, what do I do if this or if that? And parents, a lot of times don't know how or don't want to talk about it with their kids, because again, it's a very uncomfortable subject to talk about. So, what is it like over there? And how do we as a global culture, really start overcoming this mindset around the topic, around sex?
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything that you just said. It definitely is a global thing because we receive a lot of modeling consciously and subconsciously from our parents, from our society. And so if we see our parents being uncomfortable and not talking to us about it, it just becomes ingrained in us that this is definitely a sensitive, taboo topic. And it's very energetic. We can sense it. They don't even have to say it. And so when this starts to happen, this also starts to happen and play out when we grow up with our kids. So it perpetuates. So this is why I feel we need to recognize that we want to do better than our parents for our children, and get the information and knowledge for ourselves so that we can do better. And in order to do that, we ourselves have to become comfortable with our sexuality first. So it can start from making a decision to perhaps start talking to friends that you feel comfortable about. And then that helps to demystify some of that shame and inhibition around talking about sex. And then going online, getting information, knowledge, resources there are lots of free resources nowadays,
Mm-hmm.
and then really practicing and taking steps towards become comfortable talking about it with your kids, so that this cycle of discomfort around sex doesn't need to keep going on, and it can start from us, by being brave and being vulnerable.
Absolutely, absolutely. I have 4 girls, and so I've had to have the talk with all of them, and it was awkward, even with my being open about, I have no problems talking about sex, but when it comes to my kids, that was a little bit of a different story, now, but they know, and they knew that they could come to me with any questions, any concerns, anything like that. And um, my my older daughters, who are in their 20s, we have a very open dialogue about that. Now that they're adults, they feel a lot more comfortable coming to me with questions and concerns, and I'm usually the first one they call. And some of the things they call me about are the weirdest things, but I'm so glad that we have that open communication, and hopefully I'll be able to continue that with the 2 teenagers when they're adults, because if they start having sex now, I'm not going to be a happy person. But so I agree. It definitely, this has to start at home. And despite how we were raised, whatever inhibitions we were raised with or whatever, we have to kind of overcome that in order to be strong and able to talk to our children, boys and girls, about all of this.
Yeah, I'm really proud of you. At least you were brave and vulnerable, and you had that talk with your kids, even though it was probably awkward and uncomfortable, but you did it. And because of that, they feel comfortable talking to you about these topics. So by making that decision, you actually showed up for them, because now they have some form of modeling that they can in turn do it for their kids in future.
Right. I was given a book.
It's not it was not easy, I'm sure.
Yeah, no. I don't even remember how old I was, but I was given a book, like How Was I Born, or how I was made, or something along those lines. And that was my sex education, was a book left for me to kind of peruse on my own. And then as I got older and I was living with my dad and my stepmom, my teenage years, their idea of the sex talk was, well, do you feel you need birth control? And that was usually brought up after I was talking about yet another pregnant teenager at school. And, and I was like, no, I don't need that. Little did they know I was already on it. My friends took care of that for me, so it's just something that you have to start it at such an early age nowadays.
Yes.
Because our society, especially over here in the States, our society grows up fast, and things are so different nowadays than they were even back in the 80s when I was a teenager. We didn't have transgenders at school, and binaries and gender fluid and all of that, and it's confusing. It is so confusing nowadays.
Yeah, it is. However, for these people are in the minority, and this is why they often feel a lot of confusion. So it's good that we're having these dialogues so that they can have the language for themselves. But for the majority of us, unfortunately, there's almost this heterosexual privilege. We don't know what we don't know, and this is why it is confusing, because we are not them. So by having these messages out there, it is more inclusive, but definitely makes the world more confusing for the majority of us. I still think it's important to talk about it. And I really like what you're saying, because what you're saying is you have done better than what you received growing up from your parents. You have chosen to take steps towards doing better with your kids so that they get the support they need with their sex ed. And unfortunately, for a lot of people, they don't even talk about sex with their closest friends.
Right.
So they may not even get that support. And fortunately, you did.
Yeah.
So
I
I do,
had great friends growing up.
yeah. I mean, like for me, I'm shocked. Some of the stories that I hear, people who don't get any sex education from their parents, and then they don't feel comfortable talking about it to their friends. So then they're talking to nobody. So when they come to see me, like because of the lack of sex education, all these layers of misconceptions and inhibitions, it's just like this huge wall that I have to start to unpack for them.
Sure.
And it's unfortunate because then they are grappling in the dark, and there's a lot of suffering that need not have happened if they had some sex education.
Right, right. And it's also things as we get into the adult phase, it's learning about our bodies and what makes us feel good and what doesn't, where our boundaries are, being able to talk to our partners and being open and having that honest dialogue with your partner about, hey, I really liked this, but this one not so much, or, hey, let's try this. This sounds fun, or, stuff like that. And I think, in a lot of bedrooms, that conversation is not happening, and it leads to a lot of frustration and a lot of uh, bad sex,
Yeah,
basically.
I completely agree with you. So this is how the cycle perpetuates because we don't talk about it with our parents. We may not be talking about it with our friends, and then it continues to extend into the bedroom with our partner, even though we may be able to talk about any topic with our partner, but suddenly when it comes to sex, we feel we cannot because we haven't had the practice to talk about it. So one of the things that I suggest, because I went through it myself, I also found that I had difficulties talking about sex with my partners, and I was very baffled by it because I could talk to them about anything except sex. So I felt like the words were stuck in my throat and it just couldn't come out. And so I couldn't speak up when I was even in pain. I couldn't speak up. And when it did came out, it just came out all wrong. It just came out like scolding and blaming.
Right.
And I really didn't get that modeling of how to communicate in gentle ways or in assertive ways. I just could not because I didn't have the practice. So sometimes we learn things the hard way. We
Yeah.
had to do things the awkward way, the uncomfortable way, until we learn better and we make little experiments to start to basically I unthaw this voice that these words that are stuck in our throat. And it just starts from making a decision that I want to do better and doing small little experiments with yourself so that you start to speak up a little bit.
Right. What kind of experiments are you talking about?
Yes, thank you very much for asking. So, okay, let's say for instance, during sex, you felt that it was stuck and you couldn't speak up. So you think about what actually you were uncomfortable and unhappy with, and you can talk about it after sex, maybe the next day.
Ah, right.
You could plan it. You could write down a few points that you want to communicate to your partner, and you could start off by saying, "Hey, what do you think about sex yesterday?" So you make it more like a open-ended question, and you make it more like an invitation for a discussion. So that already starts the process of starting to talk about sex when you're not actually in that moment, in that heated moment of like feeling that you don't want to spoil the romance. So
Right.
talking about it afterwards removes a lot of that charge around the sexual tension. So you can start by talking about how was it, what did you think. So this came up for me. I just want to say, like, I think like more foreplay could help. That's all. So
Yeah,
you start by saying something rather than nothing, and then over time it gets easier.
I like
So
that. And
yeah,
and
little
if it's really uncomfortable, maybe just start with, hey, I really liked last night when you did this.
yeah,
And, something instead of just saying, um, foreplay means more than just taking off my clothes, dear. Instead of being kind of negative about it, you come at it, as a positive way. And that way it does create that safe space for sharing, you know, back and forth.
that's beautiful. So you can start off with an open-ended question. How was it? Keep it warm and soft and
Right.
light-hearted and almost detached, like you didn't care what was happening, but actually you do care, but you want to keep it light. So you can do that, and you can also start off with a compliment, like I really like this, what you just said,
Hmm.
and you could do the sandwich approach. You start off with a compliment, and then you say that one or two things that you think you really want to say, and then you end off with more reassurance. So try not to bring up more than one or two things at a time, because
Sure.
otherwise it may come across as too heavy, or it may come across as complaining. And just trust that with each conversation you're being brave, and over time it becomes easier. And when you take the brave step of starting to talk about sex, then it gives permission for your partner to also start to do that, even though you guys have never done it, and it can get better. So I
Yeah.
noticed that talking about it afterwards really helps. And you can do it the next day, you can do it immediately after. But like I said, sometimes it may not be the best time because your partner may just want to sleep. So I usually keep it really short if I have to do it immediately after sex. But I
Mhm.
like to do it immediately after sex actually, because this is when they are most relaxed and they are the most open, because they just had an orgasm and they feel very relaxed. So when I do bring it up, I just keep the conversation really short. So I
Mhm.
like to ask a few questions. I would usually ask, how was it? What was good about it? What could we do the next time? So how was it is very open-ended. So even if I were to give some negative feedback, I would just give one or two things and not more than that. But I would use the sandwich approach and do a lot of compliments and reassurance, and just trust that little by little it will get easier. And it does get easier,
Oh,
because I did this. I did little experiments, and um, it did get better, because I began to realize it was not what I said, because I kept thinking like if I say something bad, then it will be bad.
mhm.
It became, it wasn't what I said, it was the way I said it. If I
Right.
said it gently with a lot of love and concern, with compliments and reassurance and all these things, it really helped. So
Yeah.
over time, I became more assertive, and I had to coach myself through it because there was no coach. So these are the tips that I always give to my clients nowadays.
Yeah, and and nobody knows our bodies better than we do, right? And our partners, if they're a true, real partner and you're in a very committed, loving relationship, they want to please you and they want to make sure that you are very satisfied. And they don't know if you're faking or if you don't tell them, and as you start having that open conversation about sex, it actually, I know what I find with my husband, it actually brings us so much closer because we are able to get into that intimate talking and share, both ways. And so it actually strengthens your relationship.
Yeah, definitely. Being close to your partner definitely helps so many areas of your life. You y- y- like I call this like the home away from home. I had one client who said this before, and he says, I don't know how to explain it, but when I'm inside her, I feel like this is home. This is where I belong, and this is his
Aw.
refuge. So a lot of people think that men just want sex because they're horny. That's just part of it. I think the intimacy, the physical connection makes them feel loved and makes them feel that this is the reason why I work so hard. And I think until we have real conversations with our partner, why do you like sex? Why do you like sex with me specifically? I think we are always going to assume certain things that society says, that, men are just horny and, they
That's all
just
they
use
think about.
your body and things like that.
Right. And, don't get me wrong, men are incredibly horny, but so are women. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's part of life. It's you wouldn't be here if your parents didn't have sex. So it's part of life. And it's a part of life that, is you need to enjoy it. I mean, just enjoy it. There's so many things out there that you can do with your partner to just enjoy it. And when it comes to, talking with your kids and that kind of thing, no, you don't have to get down into the nitty gritty, but just be open and honest with them. And they'll understand that if you're open and honest with them, they'll see and they'll feel that they can be open and honest with you.
Yeah, so that's precisely the modeling that I was talking about.
Right.
If we want a life where we feel really close with our partner, then we need to be honest and vulnerable and close to ourselves and our core and what is important. So we model that and we invite our partner to open up. Yeah.
Yeah. This has been awesome. This has been such a nice change from, talking about some of the other things that I talk about on the show, because we don't talk about sex very often. And for me, it's one of those things that I love talking about it almost as much as I love doing it, And
yeah.
So thank you so much for coming on and, giving us some advice and just reminding us that, it's okay. It's okay to enjoy sex. It's okay to talk about sex. It doesn't have to be this secret hush-hush taboo thing.
Yeah, definitely. So I see our sexuality as our secret, like our superpower. Because this is our life force energy. This is where we came from. We came from sex, like you rightly mentioned. And when we have shames around our sexuality, we are really not harnessing our fullest potential. We are doing ourselves an injustice. We are not allowing ourselves to shine and to be bright, yummy, juicy, sexy. And when we shine and we heal all parts of ourselves, including our sexuality, this is when great things come into our life. Opportunities, income, promotions, our beloved, when we are shining at our highest vibration, and we heal the different parts, the wounded parts of us, this is where the real source of happiness can be, I feel.
I completely agree with you. Yeah, completely agree. So thank you again for coming on, ladies. Listening, thank you for joining us. Can't wait to hear your thoughts on the show. This has been a fun one, and we will definitely talk to you next week on the next show.